Aisha, I'd like to ask you about your work, which has focused particularly in the student context, on racial justice and climate justice. And what's your experience been of identifying the synergies and linkages between the two? Has that been something that's been possible in the context that you've worked in, or has it created polarities?
Yeah, so a little bit about me. I am a Pakistani American, and I'm talking to you right now from Coney Island, New York, which is the southernmost tip of Brooklyn. After having been in this space for relatively 5 years, I do have some critiques in what we call the mainstream youth climate movement, because I've found that the conversation has pivoted to things like individual action, things like save the turtles, and which is important, and plastics, and don't use plastic straws. There's a really big actor in the room that we are just ignoring, which is a fossil fuel industry. And the reason I began telling you guys about my heritage and where I come from is because I come from a tribal community in northern Pakistan, and my country, including countries above me geographically, have faced the brunt of the climate crisis because we were bombed, looted, and attacked for oil. And this is a part of the issue of climate change that is not spoken about. Pakistan is the eighth country in the world that will be most affected by climate change. More than 30 million people have died since 2016 due to heat waves. And right now, there's a heat wave in parts of Pakistan where temperature is over 50 degrees centigrade, which is 122 degrees Fahrenheit. If you break that down, because again, climate crisis is more than just gases emitted in the air, they affect human bodies. Our bodies maintain an average of 97 to 99.5 degrees Fahrenheit, which I think is roughly like somewhere around 35 degrees Celsius. I'm doing the math badly. If you know better, please correct me. But they maintain this temperature in heat and cold. When the outside environment gets so hot that your body cannot sweat to maintain equilibrium, it starts going into shock. When your body reaches 104 degrees Fahrenheit, it goes into heat stroke. You begin vomiting, experiencing nausea. It gets hotter, and your muscles spasm, and you start to cramp. At 107 degrees Fahrenheit, your organs begin to fail, and your kidneys shut down, as does your brain, and your body begins collapsing in on itself. This is happening right now as I'm talking to you, because heat waves, just like the rest of the climate crisis, affects rural and poor communities the most. In my country, there has been an energy shortage since like the 1990s, which means not only do people not have access to air conditioning, they don't have access to fans. It is currently hotter outside than it is inside a mother's womb, and babies are coming out and they're dying. That's how bad the climate crisis is. I also started by saying I live in a coastal community in Coney Island, and in 2012, a massive hurricane struck, and we faced the brunt of this storm. Hundreds became homeless, people's businesses were destroyed. And just to give you the context, New York City is one of the wealthiest cities in these United States. However, just like every other part of the world, it boots the poorest among it out. And so the people living in climate disaster zones or are Black and brown communities. The hurricane that occurred in 2012 affected these very communities. So much so that public housing, which is government-sponsored housing for people who cannot afford to pay rent in this expensive city, are lined at the coast. They are literally 300 feet away from the Atlantic Ocean. So should a tsunami come, should a tidal wave come, it's going to hit them first. And this is like another part of the infrastructural problem, because Black and brown bodies are used as human shields in this crisis. The other thing I started by saying is that I became involved in this work because of the fossil fuel industry and its impact on my people. But just to give you more context, the Middle East and North Africa is home to more than half of the world's crude oil and a third of its natural gas reserves. American and UK oil wars have been directly about controlling and these oil fields, and they have not been about the liberation or freedom, not in the political sense, for the people of this region. They have been driven by the desire to control said vital resources and generate profits. The US Department of Defense has a larger annual carbon footprint than most countries on Earth. Its military presence in the region has cost this country and taxpayers over $8 trillion since 1976, which, by the way, on a side note, could have gone to so many things, including healthcare, because ours, just like you guys, is a shit show, pardon my French. But it has also contributed, the military, to the destruction of environments in Iraq, Iran, Libya, Pakistan, Afghanistan. And to make it even worse, the US has used depleted uranium on people of said countries and caused not only like the advertent poisoning of our water, but the not inadvertent, the advertent poisoning of water has led to birth defects, cancer, and suffering of thousands of people. So right now, just to bring you back, parts of my country are experiencing a heat wave. Other parts of the country have been exposed to illnesses due to depleted uranium munitions, and other parts of the country are so immensely struggling to purchase resources because our crops are not growing that the climate crisis is just literally accumulating. In 2003, the US invaded Iraq, starting a war that the former head of US Central Command and military operations publicly stated was, of course, it's about oil. We can't really deny that, end quote. The global north's polluting, torturing of people in this region to ensure our access to the same toxic fuels most responsible for this crisis is hypocritical at best. This crisis, as you guys know, is proactively creating refugees. And those of us in the global north further dehumanize them when they coming looking for shelter. Although the truth is, we have very much created this crisis. My country, or the one I'm sitting in right now, consumes more than 40% of the world's resources. It has created the climate crisis. Climate change is not just happening due to changes in gas, but it's a longer consequence of the military-industrial complex. And Geeta, you asked me if there's a paradox initially, or if there's been a lack of synergy. When I see the youth climate movement being led by folks with blue eyes and blonde hair who have not experienced the climate crisis, it hurts a little bit more. It hurts differently. Because when in history have movements been led by people who did not experience the immediate harm of that oppression? Can women's led movements be led by cis white men? This is a rhetorical question for all of you. I don't think so. Can the liberation of Black and brown people be led by white folks? I don't think so. So why is it that those of us who are actively protecting the environment, who are actively facing the effects of climate change, have to not only demand our way to the front for a microphone, but the movement is not being led by those who are being affected by it. And it can't succeed if it's not being led by those who are affected by it.
Thanks, Ayisha, for that very passionate and powerful explanation of the situation that you're finding yourself in, your campaigning, and how, in terms of your experiences of advocating within this space, when you've raised these issues, when you've been in the context in which you're operating, have you experienced, has it been possible to have these messages come through, or do you feel, as you were expressing just right at the end there, that actually that space doesn't exist within the kind of mainstream, if you like, movement context in which you're operating?
Frankly, I've had to work really hard to create it. In the US, at least, it did not exist, and it still doesn't exist. And the way that this is another unfortunate reality, Fatima, maybe you can also attest to it. The way that my advocacy is taken seriously is if I name my dead bodies and if I name my trauma and share it out for consumption. That's the only way people are like, wow, we need this brown person on the panel to speak about climate change. And so it's a little bit about putting on a show I feel like, to get people to realize that the movement has to be led by people who are affected by it. And it's unfortunate that I have to, like, again, name my dead and put my trauma up for consumption for people to take me seriously. In the US, I can talk in the context of the youth climate movement, which the reason I'm explicitly saying the youth climate movement is because in my head, at least, this one is relatively like 5, 6 years old, but the climate movement has been it's been existing as long as Indigenous people have been here. And so their protection of the environment will continue long after our movement doesn't exist. And they were doing everything to protect nature before our movement existed. So in New York, again, the strikes and the protests seem to be organized by people from wealthier backgrounds, from people who did not look like me. And to give you more nuance, even in Pakistan, which is, as I said, the 8th most country affected by climate change, strike or these protests are being led by wealthy folks. It's being led by students who go to private schools. They're not being led by tribal communities or rural communities who are, again, being affected by the climate crisis. And Pakistan doesn't recognize its indigenous people. It barely recognizes its tribal people. I've been asked to speak at like national events to be the pride of Pakistan, and I absolutely refuse. Because in that context, when I go back home, it's not immediately white people who are causing the destruction of my environment. It is the Pakistani military. It is the deals that they are making with the US military, and it gets more nuanced. So yeah, it's been harder because every other social justice movement, you have to take into account class and race and your socioeconomic status. And I feel like we've kind of brushed it over, especially in the global north, because we like to categorize people in order to maintain diversity, but we don't really go into the depth of who we're electing to represent that diversity. When you invite somebody from the South Asia, at least, you need to take into account caste. You need to take into account their social hierarchy, because those systems of oppression are hurting people in conjunction with colonialism back home. It's not just enough to have your token brown person if they are from an upper caste who immigrated to the global north with oodles of money. Because even back home, if they go back home, they're living nice lives. They get to escape.